now. I asked her to watch me and make sure I click it. All righty. And then I'll just keep dropping in the chat and let you know if additional people sign in, if I notice it, if you're going to do introductions, because I kind of let that be left up to you. But thank you so much, Megan Martin, for being here today with us to talk with us about database decision making. And we have all this data. What do we do with it? And so appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules today to join us for this. And I'm going to hand it over to Megan.
Okay, thank you, Mary. So it's great to be here with you all this afternoon. I keep saying morning, so I apologize if I say that again in just a minute. So we are going to be diving into MTSS implementation and talking about database decision making a little bit this afternoon. It would help just so that we all kind of know, if you would not care to just introduce yourself, just let us know who you are, what district you're from, and what your role is in the district. And we'll kind of talk about the different roles within your district MTSS team or your school level MTSS team, and what your role has to do with data. So we'll get into that a little bit as well. So I'm just going to go in the order that's on my screen if you don't care. And actually, Ronnie, I'm going to put you on the spot. You're first in my Zoom box. So I'm going to let you go ahead and kind of share your name and role in Letcher County.
All right. I'm Ronnie Goins. Obviously, I work at Letcher County, like Megan mentioned, and I'm wear many hats, but one of which with MTSS is I'm the district MTSS coordinator.
Thank you, Ronnie. And then I see Tina. That mute button, it gets us, I know.
It gets us. I'm Tina Lyles, and I wear many hats as well in Carter County. And one of those jobs, which I enjoy, is working with MTSS and aligning our program. And I do that. Dr. Jennifer Fraley is our lead. And then I go out and train as needed.
Thanks, Tina. It's great to see you.
Great to see you.
And then I have Michelle.
Hi, I'm a speech language pathologist with Letcher County Schools.
Great, thanks. And then Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Nichols. I'm a special education teacher in Letcher County.
Good to have you. And then I have Mark.
All right, so I'm a STEM teacher in Ashland Middle School, or in Ashland Independent, but I plan to move into administration, so I kind of wanted to see what it was about.
Great to have you. Thanks, Mark. Vanessa.
Hey, I'm Vanessa Vanover, and I'm the principal at Cowan Elementary in Letcher County.
Thanks, Vanessa. And I see Richard is having some technical issues, so he is working on it. And then we'll go to Meredith.
I am Meredith Harris, and I am a 3 through 5 reading teacher at East Valley Elementary in Morgan County.
Okay, great. Thank you, Meredith. And then Richard, which district are you from? Can you let us know in the chat? Or if anybody knows Richard, let us know. I don't know.
Rick's Letcher County, and
okay, great. So I hope you can hear us. We'll go right ahead and jump in. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's make sure that, hang on. Technology is great when it works, right? You all just let me know, make sure that you all can see that full screen.
I see it.
Okay, can you still see it full screen?
No, I see it with the slides on the side right now.
Okay.
I can see the big slide and then the slides on the side.
All right. I am going to go ahead and share in the chat real quickly. We have some guided notes for today. So before we get too far, I'm going to share those. I hope that will kind of help you all with your thinking today and following through with our database decision making. So everyone should have access to that Google Doc. You are a viewer, which means you'll need to make your own individual copy to be able to type into that, but it'll kind of help you, I think, as we go through the afternoon and the different sections, and just kind of knowing where we are. If you look at that document in the left column, it kind of has key points or takeaways from each section. And then in the right column, it has next steps. So if you're at the district level, you might want to be thinking about, what does this mean for me in my district position? If you're at the school level, the same thing. Just what does this mean for me as the principal or a special education teacher? What do we need to do at the school level? So that hopefully will help you all as we go through today. Now let's try this one more time. Okay, Mary, does that look correct?
Yes, that looks good. I can see the whole screen, the whole slide.
So for some reason, I'm losing my chat and I'm losing my Zoom boxes. So Mary, you just, I know, will be monitoring the chat this afternoon. And if anybody has anything as far as questions or any comments, go ahead and drop that in the chat and Mary can let us know. I want you all to take away afternoon as much as possible. So if you have questions, stop me, ask me in the middle of whatever. We want to make sure that you all get some useful pieces today as we go throughout the afternoon. So now that we kind of know where everyone is from and what your role is, I want you to think about data and think about where you are with data and your MTSS implementation process. We're going to stop in a minute and kind of discuss that, but I just want you to be thinking about, where are we with data? Are we in a place where we have tons of data, but we're not utilizing it maybe at the right times? We are starting the data-based decision-making process with individual students, but we're not at the school level or district level yet. So just kind of think about where you are, and we will talk about that in just a second. Hey, I'm going the wrong way, Mary. Sorry about that. So we're going to talk a little bit about teaming and making sure that we have the right people at the table for database decision making. We know that that is a critical step that we cannot skip over. If we have the right data, but we don't have the right people, we are still not going to be making progress with multi-tiered systems of support. Then we're going to talk about that meeting structure just a little bit. What does that agenda look like? What's the timeline? And talk about scheduling those out. We're then going to jump into kind of a data audit, looking at data a year at a glance. What data do we have in different domains for MTSS, as well as how are we using different pieces of data in different tiers? So we should not be using the same data set in tier 1 that we're using in tier 2 and tier 3. So do we have an understanding of that? And do we know what that looks like for our individual school or our individual district? We'll then go into the 4-step problem solving process and our data protocol that we have. And we have some resources to help you all as you think about implementing that at the school level or the district level. And then I really want you towards the end of the afternoon to be thinking about, what are our next steps? Again, whether you're at the school or the district level, where do we go from here? So what's the first thing that I need to do with data? I know that Mary introduced me earlier, but just kind of as a reminder, we are with the University of Louisville. We have the Center for Instructional and Behavioral Research in Schools, which is a national research center. And we are contracted by the Department of Education to provide support for MTSS technical assistance across the state. So a lot of times people are just a little bit confused about all the different pieces and different acronyms. So I thought I would share that quickly. So as we begin thinking about database decision-making within an MTSS structure, we just want to go back and think about what MTSS is. So when we think about that statewide definition, Kentucky MTSS is that multi-level prevention system. So we want to remember we're thinking about and focusing on prevention at all tiers. So tier 1 is about prevention, but tier 2 and tier 3 are also about prevention. We are preventing student failure in all domains. We also want to remember that we are supporting academic achievement as well as those social skills and that emotional regulation for students so that they are able to focus and concentrate on academic content. And we're doing so through an integration of differentiated core instruction. So just a reminder, that's our big overarching definition for MTSS. Now, how many of you all, when you think about MTSS and your journey and wherever you are at the school level or the district level, how many of you all feel like you are maybe on a road that looks like the interchange on the right? Does anybody ever feel that way? Drop that in the chat. Sometimes it feels like you might be going in circles.
Vanessa says yes in the chat.
Okay. Sometimes it feels like we might be on a hamster wheel, like we're having the same discussions over and over.
Tina says yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So when
Thank you all for dropping in the
when we
chat.
specifically about data, and that data being one element of our overall MTSS system, we have to think about where we are currently and where we're trying to go. So I want you to think about that for just a second. Where are you with data and MTSS in your district or your school? So if you are at the school level, answer this question from that perspective. If you are at the district level, answer this question from that perspective. But where are we with data and MTSS? Where are we trying to go? So I want you to think about, we're in the process of creating a district team. And we want our district team to begin looking at data in August. You know, that might be a goal for you. You might be saying, we already have a district team. We are already looking at data, but we don't know if we're looking at the right data. So we want to make sure we're looking at the right data at the right time during the year. So everybody just kind of stop and think about that for just a second. Where are you and where are you going with data? So you can drop that in the chat or you can unmute if you would prefer.
In the chat, we have Vanessa with we have our school team and are hoping to look at data prior to school starting back.
That's a great direction to be headed in.
I'll go ahead and unmute instead of typing. I think at the district level, we're doing a pretty good job of looking at data for our district MTSS meetings, but I don't know if there's if we're always using the right data. I don't know if there's some other data sources that we may should look at, but we are in the process. We started our district MTSS meetings probably, I guess, in November, our monthly meetings, and we're getting that established, but you know, I'm kind of anxious to see if there's other data sources that we should be looking at.
And I think that was Ronnie talking. Was that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself
No,
on
that's
that.
okay. I can't see any of the boxes, so I just want to make sure. So that's great to be thinking about. You know, you already are in a place where you have data and you're having these discussions, but we want to make sure we're looking at the right data. So that's a great goal too, is because, you know, we can look at data, but if we're not looking at the right data to make decisions for improving our system for students, then sometimes that seems like a wasted conversation or a wasted time. So thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Any goals for data? Where are we trying to go?
I'm Tina from Carter County.
Okay.
I think for us, we have things in place for our district, and at every monthly administrators meeting, we discuss our MTSS data as a district, and then principals break out and look at their individual data and how we can assist them. But where I think we're falling short is we can't control when the principals go back and how often they're looking at data with their teachers and their teams at their school level.
Tina, that's a great point. And we'll talk a little bit about monitoring today and what are some of the ways that you all from a district perspective could monitor that. So that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. My mouse is getting a little bit happy. It seems to be moving the slides forward without me touching it. So just as a reminder, we have 6 essential elements with our Kentucky MTSS framework. We are really focused on that database decision making today, but I also want you to think about database decision making doesn't necessarily work effectively if some of these other elements and these other components are not in place. So the one that database decision making is most dependent upon is that collaborative problem solving team. So we're going to talk a little bit about the team today, because again, we have to make sure we have the right people at the table in order for database decisions to be effective and move students forward. Just as a reminder, we do have the implementation guide that has an entire section on database decision making, and we have the KYMTSS website that you can always refer to for database decision making and some of those resources within that. So when we start thinking about data and we start thinking about our tiers, we also want to remember that everything is preventative with MTSS and everything is dependent upon this foundational layer of green, this foundational core instruction layer. So tier 1, support for all students in the school. We are looking at school-wide data when we think about tier 1. We are looking at district-wide data when we think about tier 1. And then when we think about tier 2 and tier 3, we really are looking at either small group data or individual student data. So we really want to be strategic and very intentional about which data sets we use for which tiers. And that's something I think that if you are just starting your MTSS journey, that's kind of sometimes hard to think about which data sets do we use with which tiers and which meetings, because there are a lot of different data sets, like someone's already mentioned, and there are a lot of different places where we need the data. So we want to make sure that that is something that we have really clear. Again, just a different way for us to think about that tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and the data. But again, prevention is key with our multi-tiered systems of support. We also want to think about the data in each tier and those layers. So how does the data we're using from tier 1 impact tier 2? That data from tier 1 should impact tier 2 conversations. It should impact tier 2 teaming, and it should impact tier 2 when we make decisions on interventions, when we make decisions for individual students about remaining in an intervention. We call these decision rules. So what are our decision rules around individual students? What is our decision rule for a student remaining in the intervention they're in, or an intervention being faded? If we have the goal for tier 2 is that intervention is so successful that student no longer needs it and they're meeting benchmark, we've closed that gap. So when we think about that tier 2 intervention, what is our decision rule for fading that intervention? And then of course, we also know, and research supports, that there are going to be some students who receive a tier 2 intervention that it's still not enough for, and they're going to need something more intense in tier 3. So what are our decision rules for moving students from tier 2 into tier 3? So all of those are things that we want to be thinking about. So we're going to start with teaming, and let's just kind of focus and think about teaming and where we are at the district or building level right now. So as many of you remember, with MTSS, we have 4 levels of teaming. We have our district level MTSS team, we have a school level or building level MTSS team, and then we have to think about the grade or content area teaming, and then the student intervention team. So when we look at these teams a little bit closer, that district level team is always going to be looking at district level data, but we're looking at data from tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So what might that data look like from a district perspective? We're looking at the number of students and the percentage of students who met benchmark with our universal screening. We're looking at our statewide data. We are, as you all know, as part of the new Senate Bill 9, we are now required to have a reading diagnostic assessment for students in K through 3rd grade. So that's another data set that we would really want to make sure we're looking at from a district perspective. We're going to look at how many students met benchmark across our district for the domains of reading and math and behavior, but we're also going to look at individual grade levels. If we look from a district perspective, and let's say we have 13 elementary schools, we can look at whole school. We can also look at grade levels. So we might see that our 3rd grade students across the district were some of our lowest benchmark numbers for universal screening. So we can kind of do a deep dive into that data and say, why do we think this is occurring? That's going to be where our data protocol comes in. So why do we think this is occurring, and what can we put in place? Is it that we need to provide additional support at an individual grade level or multiple grade levels? Is it that we need to provide additional professional learning and strategy training for one domain? Maybe it's math. And so we say, you know, we have a lot of new math teachers across the district. We need to go back and really look at how we can build the capacity of our new math teachers. So that's really that district level team, what they're going to be looking at. Then you go to the school level, and we want to be looking at the same data sets, but instead of that district level, we're looking at the school level. So the district and school level, we always kind of say that's your 30,000 foot view. That's your view of all students within that district or within that school and what that looks like. Best practice recommendation is that both of these teams, the district level and school level, meet on a monthly basis. Each time you meet, you have an agenda, you are looking at data, and you are making decisions on next steps. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to pause this right here. I want you to think about where you are, district or school level, and think about your district level team and your school level team. You can take just a second and look at the chart. Where are you with these teams? Are we meeting on a regular basis? Do we have our team in place, but we don't have decision makers at the table? Are we having these meetings, but we still aren't sure about what we should be doing at the meeting? So let's just kind of pause and think about your district level and your building level MTSS teams right now. What does that look like for each of you? If you are at the classroom level, you may just say, you know, I don't know if we're having school level MTSS teams or not. I'm not a part of that team. So everybody just kind of pause, drop something in the chat. Where are you with teaming at the district and school level?
Not gotten anything in the chat yet, Megan.
Okay, we'll give you just
I'm watching, just letting you know. Stephanie has, I am on our school's MTSS team. We meet monthly and discuss data and next steps.
Fabulous.
Meredith says ours are very designated and meet regularly.
That is great to hear. I know Morgan County has done a lot of work around MTSS for a long time. So that's great to hear, Meredith.
Ronnie's got in the chat, we have our district and school level teams in place. We are meeting regularly and looking at data. I feel pretty good about where we are as far as implementation, but I wonder if we should be doing more.
Thanks, Ronnie. Again, that sounds like a really good place.
And Mr. Cornett said he's not on the MTSS team, so
okay.
Doesn't. Michelle says we have a school team that includes principal, teacher, and therapist on a weekly basis.
Okay. So when you think about that school level team, you really want to make sure that you have representation from across your school, just like your district team needs representation from across the district. So if you're not on your school level team or you're not sure if you have one, typically that team is going to be meeting on a monthly basis. You may have grade level representatives. Your administrators are always going to be a part or leading that team because that's who has decision-making authority in our building. It's great to hear that we have some therapists on those teams, but we also want to make sure we have our school counselors, our family resource center directors, or our Frisky coordinators. If we have a school nurse, that's a great person to bring on board as well. So anybody who has any hand in providing wraparound with students is great to have on those teams at the district or school level. So when we look at our chart, our third level of teaming really consists of, you notice it says grade level or content. I will tell you that typically this is your PLC makeup. So these meetings, when we talk about grade level or content area, are typically looking at groups of students. So we may be looking at students who didn't meet benchmark and talking about how we are going to provide intervention in fourth grade for some fluency work, because that's what our data supports that we need. So those grade level or content area MTSS teams typically, again, are looking at groups of students, and they're in whatever your PLC structure is. So I want everybody just to kind of pause and think about that right now and what that looks like for you at your individual school. Do you have a PLC protocol? Are you using database decision-making? Some PLCs are using the PDSA model, which is also a 4-step problem-solving process. Sometimes we are using a root cause analysis model, which is, again, another 4-step problem-solving process. We just want to make sure that we are looking at data and making decisions based on what the data is telling us, not what Megan and Mary think or feel about a specific group of students or individual kids ever. And then we get down to the 4th level. And that 4th level is what we have historically done a really good job with across the state of Kentucky, that student intervention team. So when you think about that student intervention team, that's when we have a team coming together and meeting on one individual student. We are looking at Johnny's individual reading and math and behavior, and we're talking about what his strengths are. We're talking about what his areas of growth are. We may be looking at individual progress monitoring data for that student and determining, is this intervention working for him? Is this intervention not working? Is he making adequate progress at this time? So when we think about that last level, that student intervention team, that is typically what that looks like. Now, there is no recommendation by any state regulation in Kentucky, but typically you want to make sure that you are meeting on students and looking at data every 4 to 6 or 4 to 8 weeks. So if you're going longer than 8 weeks without having a meeting and looking at that progress monitoring data, that's something that you really need to consider thinking about how you could change that. And if you're looking at individual student data on a weekly basis, that's probably too soon and too quick. So one of the things I want you to think about is who is responsible for leading this grade level or content area teaming and the student intervention teaming within your school or your district. Sometimes we see that that is a school counselor that leads that. Sometimes there's a building level MTSS coordinator that leads that. So let's just pause just a second and talk through what our grade level or content area teams look like, and then what our individual student intervention teams look like. So let's just talk about what the structure is that we have in place in your different districts and buildings at this time. You can go ahead and drop that in the chat, or you can unmute. Either one works.
Well, I'm watching the chat, Megan. Nothing's been dropped yet.
That's okay. Everybody needs a second to think about it. What do our grade level or student intervention teams look like at this time? About another 30 seconds and then try to drop something in that chat.
In the chat, it says we use the PDSA protocol. The grade level teams typically include the administrator and, as much as possible, the guidance counselor or therapist if needed. And that's with Tina from Carter County.
Great. Thanks, Tina. So when you think about the grade level using PDSA, typically that's looking at groups of students. Do your grade level teams also meet on individual students? It kind of sounds like they do if you're pulling in a therapist, because typically your therapist would just be there for individual students.
Another in the chat, Ronnie's put, I'm really not sure. I would think we are probably stronger with the grade level teams than with the student intervention teams. It probably varies by school.
Okay, thanks, Ronnie. That's something good, I think, for you all to think about in all of your districts is, do we know what that looks like? So, you know, a lot of districts have a pretty strategic PLC protocol. So what is that PLC protocol? When are we looking at data? What data are we looking at? I think oftentimes this grade level and content area and student intervention team, they are fuzzy for people. Whether it is your building level administrators or classroom teachers, sometimes we don't see these as two separate team meetings. Sometimes it looks like it's all done at one time. So I want you to think about efficiency of your MTSS system. If we are utilizing our teams to be most efficient, then we wouldn't have our grade level or content area team looking at each individual student every time, because that's going to be super time consuming. So you want to think about how we're grouping students. So if I'm teaching sixth grade math, what are the 3 different math interventions that sixth graders can participate in? Are we looking at who is in what intervention and which interventions seem to be making the most gains with our kids? So those are things that we want to think about at that grade level and content area meeting. And then when we're talking, anytime we're talking about individual students, it's always going to fall to that 4th layer of the teaming. So some of our districts recently we have seen are really doing a great job at the district level. They're doing a really good job at the school level. But then when it gets down to this, you know, level 3 and level 4 of these teams, it's a little bit fuzzy. And I know that Ronnie just kind of said, you know, I'm not really sure what that looks like at the school level. So that's something I think if you're working on building capacity within your district, that you might want to think about really putting some type of procedure in writing or making it very clear to your administrators what that expectation is. You know, we expect you every 6 weeks to be having this content area or grade level MTSS discussion. And this is what that discussion might look like. These are some guiding questions. And it also may be kind of clarifying that student intervention team. I know that all of your all's districts from working with them have some type of form that teachers are completing or interventionists are completing. So who's looking at those individual forms? Are we implementing, are we putting progress monitoring data in graph format? Who's responsible for that? So those are our kind of big questions around those level 3 and level 4 teams. So I'm going to pause for just a second and see if you all have any questions. What are your questions that you have with the 4 levels of teaming that we might be able to talk through or clarify?
A couple more things were added in the chat, Megan, before you asked that.
Okay.
Tina had responded to the therapist about the therapist. She said they do, and depending on the student, the district comes in for support. And Kenneth added, he wasn't sure exactly what you were wanting. So their PLCs are weekly and the interventionists meet with the grade level teachers. Data is always used. So.
Okay, great. So what questions do you all have that you want to talk through around teaming? We're a pretty small group today, so we'll just kind of stop and address questions as we go. Any questions around teaming? If you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat and we can come back to them at any time. I do want you to look at the document that's on the right. This is called the Team Organization Worksheet. When we start working with districts, oftentimes we find that they have multiple teams that are looking at the same data sets or are working towards the same goals. So if you are a district where you have kind of just started this MTSS journey within the past year or so, I really would encourage you to utilize some type of chart or have discussion at your next meeting around the teams and which teams are looking at which data sets. So as you can see on this worksheet, we have team/committee A lot of times at the school level, we are calling them committees still. And so I was just talking with the school maybe 2 weeks ago, and they said, well, we have an MTSS team at the school level, but we have a PBIS team too. And then we have a culture and climate team. And then we have a student behavior team. And so I said, okay, so you just told me you have 4 different teams that really are kind of looking at the same thing. So I want you to tell me, what are the data sets that each of these 4 teams looks at and talks about? For some of the teams, they were able to say, here's the data set. And for some of the teams, they didn't know what the data set was. So I think that's really important to think about. Do we have multiple teams doing the same thing? We want to make MTSS as streamlined and as simple as possible. It's not always simple, but if we have multiple teams or multiple committees looking at the same data, we should be able to combine some teams or really think about what the purpose of those meetings are. Is it just a checkbox that's a requirement from our district? Is it something that we are actually utilizing to support students in some way? So I think this is a great worksheet to use at the building level if you're an administrator, or at the district level, really thinking about what teams do we have in place. Another thing that we oftentimes hear from district teams is they'll say, well, you know, Megan, as part of those regulations from the School Safety and Resiliency Act, we really have to have a trauma team. We have to have a threat assessment team. And I'm like, yes, you do, but you have 6 different teams when you really could have one team and just say this one team does all of these different things. So it really just comes back to organization, who's in charge of teaming at your district level. Can that MTSS team look at what other committees or subcommittees are in place? We also are going to talk in just a second about subcommittees, and that's something that a lot of districts really need to have, is a subcommittee in some capacity, because they're working on other initiatives. So, you know, we want to make sure that MTSS is aligning initiatives within our district instead of siloing them. So MTSS really should be your framework for where all initiatives come together to support students.
Megan, I agree with Meredith. This is a great worksheet you've got on the right. Is that going to be available with them to be able to share with maybe teachers in their building, or to be able to utilize? Is there a copy of it?
Absolutely. I'm going to put a copy of all of these different documents that are in the slide deck today. The slide deck and the different documents will be in your folder that Mary shared with you earlier. I'll just, my 11:30 ran over just a little bit and I didn't have time to drop those in that folder. So all of these will be there for you today.
I'll repost that in the chat too, for you all, for a link to the folder, and then I will email it out to you all as well again when Megan has that all in there. Thank you, Megan. And she said, just because if you never served on the team, it can be very confusing. Thank you, says Meredith.
Yes. The other thing that we really encourage districts and schools to have is a communication plan. So once you have your MTSS structure in place, it's really good to talk about your different levels of teaming and who they communicate to and what is communicated. So if you look at this team communication plan, you can see, you know, you may have a district leadership team. I know that several districts call it the COLT team, central office leadership team. It may be called the cabinet team. We have districts that say they're having cabinet meetings, but that might be your first level that other things feed through. And then you might have your district MTSS team, which meets on a monthly basis. You may have subcommittees within that district team, such as a mental health committee or an academic, you know, your chief academic officer may be leading some academic strategy work in your district. So those would be sub teams. And then you think about the building level. So this is a template that is really great, I think, to start working on. You probably are not going to be in a place where you can complete all of these things right now. But if you start thinking about the pieces of how often does this team meet? What is the responsibility? What's the communication cycle? So who are we communicating this information to? Is it going to administrators? Is it supposed to go to teachers? Is it going to families and students? So it's really great to start thinking about these different pieces of your communication plan, because then you can very clearly see where are our gaps. Maybe we don't know who our building level MTSS team shares data with. So that's something that we need to clarify at the district level. So this communication plan is also going to be in that folder, and I will share with you, there's going to be a copy in there that has one completed so that you can kind of see what that might look like at the district level. Some districts require each building to have one of these in addition to the district. So again, that goes back to your district MTSS team and what your all's requirements are in each of your different districts. But I do think that this communication plan is very helpful. Do any of you all have one of these or are in the process of creating a communication plan? Even our districts that we have worked with for a very long time and are implementing MTSS with fidelity, these communication plans, they look at them on an annual basis. They go back and adjust as needed. If there's a new administrator, this is really helpful for new principals. It's helpful for new teachers as well when you think about the different teams that are meeting or committees at the building level. Any questions about this before we move into meetings? All right, so we are at a place, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a second, where I would like for you to go back to your guided notes. If you go back to your guided notes for today, I want you to think about the first and second column for teaming. And we're going to take about 5 minutes. It is 12:45, so let's take about 5 minutes. I want everybody to go back to your guided notes, drop a few things in your guided notes, and then we will talk through what you all said your goals were for for teaming within your guided notes. So we'll take about 5 minutes to do that. Thank you, Mary, for dropping that in the chat. We'll come back at 12:50 and talk about next steps. Okay, if you could be finishing those up. Let's talk about where we are, whether we're at the building level or at the district level. Where are we with collaborative problem solving teams? And what might be our next steps? What might be our next steps? Let's talk through that. These teams really are critical to the database decision-making process. We want to make sure that these teams are in place and we have the right people at the table to make decisions. What were some things that you all said might be next steps for you, whether it's at the building level or at the district level?
Megan, this is Ronnie. I'll go ahead and start out. One of the things I put on here is make sure and review our teaming structure for our school level teams. We've shared that before during our district level teams, and I think we have a lot of teams that are made up kind of like what we had suggested, but I think we still have some that don't have all the stakeholders they need at the table.
Okay.
And we've reviewed that a little bit, but I think that's something that we do need to go back in and reset that expectation. So we're getting that consistency across the district and bringing those stakeholders to the table. And another one I put is make sure that all schools have established all 4 levels of team, and especially the student intervention team. That's probably where me guessing, and I don't really know. And that's something that we have to establish as well at the district is our expectations for that. But I don't know if that's something that we've consistently got at each school.
Okay, thank you, Ronnie, for sharing. That's a a couple great next steps that you all can do pretty easily just to kind of streamline your processes and make sure that everybody's on the same page with that teaming. So that's great. Anybody, I know Ronnie's kind of your lead in Letcher County. Anybody at the building level want to add anything to that? For what your all's next steps were, or things that you want to make sure are in place?
This is Vanessa and I'm in Letcher County also. I think some of our next steps would be similar to what Ronnie's saying. We need to get some more student implementation, like talk to them more about what needs to happen and make sure they're included in the process. But our biggest thing for next year is just to be consistent. We were really good about being consistent at the district level, but for our school level, we kept moving our meeting and trying to accommodate everybody. And if one person couldn't be there, we rescheduled. So I think this year it's just going to have to be, this is our meeting time, our day. And if for some reason people can't, then we just catch them up on it and get everybody we can and try to keep it as consistent, because I think the consistency is a big piece of it. So that's where we really need to focus.
I'm so glad you said that, Vanessa. I know that it can be challenging, you know, when you have 8 to 10 people that need to be on a meeting and need to be, or in a meeting and need to be talking about the data and then sharing information back out with their teammates, you know, their grade level teammates or their content area teammates. It can be a challenge, but I think you're exactly right. We really encourage districts and schools to say, here's when our MTSS team meetings are occurring. You know, it's helpful to say if they're the first Wednesday of every month from 3:30 to 4:30 or whatever that may look like, to have that consistent day and time. And then also to say, you know, we're having these meetings whether you're here or not. So if you want to be a part of the process and you want your voice to be included, you really need to make these a priority. The other thing sometimes our districts and schools will do is they'll try to have those during the day at times, because they feel like that's a little bit more helpful to teachers, making sure that we can get all of our representatives there. That's, I think, really challenging. It's also really challenging right now with the situation with substitute teachers. And we still, you know, I know at the end of last year, almost every district and school still had open positions with no applicants. So I think that is becoming harder and harder, but really making sure that they're on the calendar, everybody has the invite to it. Those are going to be things that are really important moving forward for consistency. So thank you for sharing that, Vanessa. Anybody else? Next steps, any next steps?
Not seeing anything in the chat, Megan.
Okay, we're going to go back to. Let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen here. Okay, Mary, can you see that?
Nope, I'm not seeing your screen right now.
Okay, hang on one second.
I'm just seeing up there. It's starting to show. Yep.
Okay.
And you're good.
Okay, so when we think about the team, the next step to think about is those meetings. And so we're just going to talk about a few key pieces with our MTSS meetings, consistency being one of them. Your meeting structure is also going to be really important. You want to make sure that you're looking at data each time you meet. And these meetings don't become a time when your teachers or your counselors or your even administrators sometimes are venting about things. So we know that there is a time to vent and there's a time to kind of talk about things, but these meetings, we want to make sure that they are very, very structured and we're intentionally looking at data and having those data-based decision-making conversations. So it's really important that you make sure that you have a team lead who's the one that is sending the invites, you know, who's responsible for that, who's responsible for ensuring that we have the conference room reserved for that time, who's the one, you know, that's responsible for all of those leading roles. Typically that's a principal or an assistant principal. You want to think about who is responsible for your data. So most of the time at the district level, we have someone who's responsible for academic data, and it may be the DAC. And it could be someone different that's responsible for your behavior or social emotional data. Sometimes that is your DPP. Sometimes that is an MTSS lead. You may have a behavior consultant at the district level. So who's responsible for bringing that data? So before we even get to what data we're looking at, are we naming a person who's responsible for that? The other thing with the data is we want to make sure we're always looking at it in graph format. We can have spreadsheets for days, and that's a great place to start. But if we're in a meeting and we're looking at a spreadsheet and we have 1,200 kids in our building, that's not doing a lot of good. We need to be looking at graphs. So we want to make sure that the data is in graph format when we get to the meeting. The other thing, we're going to talk about Tableau just a little bit. So with Tableau, we want to make sure that you have pulled those Tableau reports and downloaded them either in a PowerPoint or a PDF to be able to access during the meeting. Because if you get in a meeting and you try to log into Tableau, those of you that have done it know that sometimes that circles and circles. I mean, it can circle for 30 minutes before it pulls your report up. So we've wasted our entire meeting waiting for a report to generate. So we want to make sure we have those ready to go. And then who's going to take notes? These meetings are really important. We're making important decisions. So we have to make sure we are tagging someone to take notes and go back to ensure at the next meeting we have followed through with all those action items. We've already talked a little bit about that meeting schedule. Getting it on the calendar is important. We encourage at the end of this year, before school dismissed at the end of this year, for districts and schools to go ahead and send those invites out. Make sure they're on people's calendars. Even if you have turnover or change within your team, get them on the calendars, and then make sure that that is a time when everybody knows where the meeting is, what it is, what we're doing, and having a structured agenda. We're going to look at an agenda here in just a second. So those are important. When we think about that structure, the structure of communication, this goes back to that communication, is someone from the district level representing each individual school. And is the data from the district level meetings being taken to the school level? So I want you to think about this. It's not that if I'm a fourth grade teacher, I don't really care what that data looks like across the district, except to say, here's my district data, and here's where we fall as a school. So oftentimes that helps you set goals. If we know that we have 45% of students meeting benchmark in fourth grade reading across the district, but in my individual school, that percentage is more like 30, then that tells us kind of where we are and what some of our goals are. The other thing that this is really helpful for when we're looking at data back and forth is looking at any type of, we call it sometimes the other, the mental health data. Are we in an area of our community where we may need additional supports or structure from teachers for things like trauma-informed practices? Or for PBIS expectations, we have to think about those things too. So it's important that we know what the data is, but we're not digging into district level data at the school meeting. The purpose of the school meeting is to look at school level data, okay? During these school level meetings, again, we should never be talking about individual students. If you are naming individual students and talking through that at your school level MTSS meeting, that really is a level 4 meeting. That's your student intervention meeting. So I want you to think about that. And then thinking about those subcommittees. Sometimes it's really helpful for a district to create a graphic that's similar to this so that everybody involved with the MTSS process knows and understands what those subcommittees or sub-teams are for and what they are doing. So if you notice on the screen, we have our district MTSS team at the top, and then you have 3 different subcommittees that are actually coming out of that district team. So you have a math subcommittee. They may be working on selecting a new tier 1 resource in the next 3 months, and that's what that math subcommittee is working on. You may have an ELA subcommittee, and they're working on training tier 2 strategies for reading and writing for elementary and middle school. And then you have this PBIS/mental health subcommittee that is working on behavior. They're working on PBIS. They also may be looking at your trauma plan that's required from the district, or your trauma practices that you're going to be training. So each of these subcommittees, it's important that whatever's occurring at the subcommittee, there's a lead that is sharing that information at the district meeting. So for example, I may be the PBIS/SEL lead for my district. At that district meeting every month, I'm just going to share an update. I'm going to say, we're working on training this strategy for tier 1 PBIS, and we're working on training this trauma practice in PLCs across the district. All teachers across the district are going to be trained by November 1st or whatever that looks like. So you're just sharing those goals and what each of those individual teams is working on at that district level meeting. That's going to look exactly the same if you're at the school level sharing that information. So I'm going to pause here just a second. Do these graphics help you? Do these graphics make it a little clearer? Is this something you think that your school, your district may benefit from? Maybe we need to create a graphic so that we're all on the same page about what this should look like. Let's just pause for just a second about the organization of the problem-solving teams. Does this help you? This might be something that you want to add to your action items or next steps, is we need to create a district graphic so that everyone's really clear on which teams are meeting when and what they're responsible for. Any thoughts on the teaming structure? Anything in the chat at all, Mary, before we move on?
No, nothing's in the chat yet, Megan.
Okay. The next piece with our structure and our meetings really is the agenda. So I'm going to drop an agenda in the folder, but this is just kind of an overview of what an agenda typically looks like. I want you to look at the first section. It says we're reviewing our annual goals. So what are our goals as a district or as a school for this year? We want to make sure we're staying focused on what our goals are. If our meetings are getting sidetracked or there are conversations that are not related to our goals, we probably need to either reevaluate what we're talking about at the meeting, or we need to reevaluate our goals. We also want to make sure everybody knows who our leads are. We want to talk through meeting norms. You know, those are typically through your PLC protocol. What are your meeting norms? Make sure we remind everybody. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to say, what are the action items from the previous meeting? So I'm going to give you an example of that. Let's say that we are in a high school and in September, we decided that our tardies to class in fourth period were extremely high and we want to work on that. Well, fourth period's when lunch is, teachers aren't always on assigned duty. Sometimes they're running late. So we decided that we were going to implement hallway sweeps, and principals were going to be in our hallways, making sure that teachers were on duty during that time. So the whole month of September, we implement hallway sweeps. We're ensuring as administrators that our teachers are on duty. And then we come back in October and we're going to look at that data to see if that has helped to reduce tardies. So our action item really is, did we implement hallway sweeps? So we're just going to be able to answer that really easily. Yes, we did, or no, we didn't. And we're principals on duty checking to see if teachers were at their assigned location. So we look at that data. Tardies are down 50%. That meant that what we did worked. So we're going to continue doing that. So if we have action items from the previous month, we're always going to review those first. Then we're going to go into the data for the month. Now you will see on the document on the left, it says data review and discussion. We have it broken down into academic data, behavior data, and then integrated mental health data. We're going to look at the different data sets in just a second. You are never, ever, ever going to look at all of these at one time. Okay. This is more of an exhaustive list of data that we want you to be thinking about and how you could use, but you are never going to be looking at all of these data points in 1 month. We want you to be strategic about when and how you're looking at different data pieces. After your data discussion, which is going to take you through that data analysis protocol and that 4-step problem solving process, you're then going to say, here are the action items for this month. You're going to add those to the agenda. So what you see on the right is from an action plan that is a yearly action plan. Some districts and schools choose to use something similar to what's on the left, like it might be a Google Doc, and they choose to put their minutes right in the agenda. Some districts and schools choose for it to be an agenda that goes throughout the entire year, broken down by month. So you can do that anyway. We just encourage districts and schools to know where the minutes are to be able to go back and refer to them so that everything's in one place and we are ensuring that action items are followed through with. So we're going to look at this in just a minute as well. So if you notice at the bottom of this, it says year at a glance. And so we're going to look at a data plan year at a glance in a few minutes, and you all are going to get to drop some of your data into that. But I really want you to think about what months of the year data is appropriate to fit into. So for example, if we start school the first week of August and we give our universal screener within the first 2 to 3 weeks, we're obviously going to be able to look at that universal screening data in September. If we don't give that screener again until December, then October and November, we're not going to drop in there that we're looking at our MAP data or our ready data, because that data has already been part of that meeting. We're not going to go back and look at that same data again, okay? Unless for some reason we didn't get to it. So we're going to look at this here in just a second, this year at a glance. This kind of breaks it down into months, semesters, as well as academic data and social, emotional, or behavior data. So why have we done this? We have done this because oftentimes there is someone different leading academic initiatives than who is leading those social, emotional initiatives or behavior initiatives. So this allows you as an administrator at the district level or at the school level to really clearly see what data you have in each month, and for you all as the lead to determine this is when and how we're going to look at each of these data sets. So I'm going to drop this into the chat in just a few minutes, and all of you all are going to get a chance to look at the data that you have currently and kind of think about where it would go or where it would fit at this time. So I am going to stop sharing for just a second. I'm going to go ahead and put the link in the chat to that document. Okay, that is in your chat now. Do you see that?
I don't see it yet, Megan.
Okay, let me try one more time. It kind of did something weird there.
There it is.
Okay, everyone should have access to that document. Again, this is view only, so you're going to have to make a copy of it for yourself. So go ahead and make a copy of that and let me know when you've made a copy. Just give me a thumbs up in the chat if you don't care, when you're ready, when you have a copy of that you can work through.
Got a thumbs up with Ronnie. Did you see that?
I did not.
Okay. Thumbs up for Meredith.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again.
Got it. Tina says thumbs up with Vanessa.
Great. So what you see on your screen is just kind of an overview of data sources. So I want you to think through, whether you're at the district level or at the building level, I want you to think through what you have and what you're currently using. Let's just start with academic and behavior. Don't worry about that school mental health or community data yet at all. Okay, so let's just look at the first two columns. Think about academic and behavior data. I want you within your copy of your year at a glance data to go ahead and think about where you would put things like the state assessment or your universal screening. So it's really good, I think, for communication purposes to say universal screening map. Do our teachers, sometimes our teachers don't know and understand when we refer to assessments by their name, like NWA or iReady or STAR, that is our actual universal screening. So when they talk about universal screening, they'll say, I don't know what that is. That's our STAR or that's our iReady. So it's really good to go ahead and put those in that year at a glance data source document as to what those assessments are and then the actual name or what company you're using. So I'm going to leave this up on the screen. I'm going to give us about, let's see, it's 1:11. Let's go till about 1:15, and then we'll pause and kind of talk through a few things with this. But I want you to go ahead and put in data into your year at a glance document. And I'm going to leave this on the screen so that you can see this. Mary, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Well, I can't see my screen, so that's a problem.
Now I can't see your screen.
Try one more time.
I can see it.
Does that look correct now?
Yeah, I see the Quebec trading example year at a glance. Is that what I'm supposed to see?
Yes. All right. So let's go ahead and kind of talk through what you all dropped in as far as data. Let's just kind of talk through this together to make sure that everybody's on the same page about how this works and how this is helpful to your MTSS team. Okay. So let's think about August. Did anyone drop any academic data into August to discuss for your meetings? Anybody put anything in August for academic data?
I did. I put the spring diagnostic in iReady.
Okay, so I just want to clarify, Tina, are you utilizing the spring iReady data as your K3 reading diagnostic, or are we saying universal screening data?
We will administer the iReady again in August, but in the meantime, teachers do have access to those documents from the spring.
Okay, so it might be that you have universal screening. And she mentioned that hers was already. So you're dropping that into that box. You want to make sure it fits, but drop it into that box. So that tells you that's when you're going to look at that data. So what were your other times during the year, I'm sorry, Tina, that you said you were also going to look at this universal screening already data? What other months?
In December.
Okay.
And in April.
All right. So we've got that in there. Anybody
in the chat? Sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
In the chat, we have Vanessa. She put Brigance, Dibbles, and Math universal screeners.
Okay, great. Tell me again.
Brigance.
Okay.
Dibbles.
Okay, are we using Dibbles as a universal screener? I don't know what district and I don't know how they're using it. So tell me what we're using it for to make sure we get it correct.
That's Vanessa in Letcher.
It's not necessarily a universal screener. I guess it could be more of just a beginning of the year, like a benchmark type screener. But
Okay.
we will do it 3 times throughout the year. So it's a good starting point with it for our kids. Brigance would only be done, of course, with kindergarten at the beginning of the year, but it would be some data to look at to help our kindergarten teachers know where we're starting and what they may need to do from there.
Sure. Okay. That's a great point. Anybody have any other academic data?
Megan, I'm going to kind of ask a question there. Speaking of that, Vanessa brought that up with like Brigance, and we've got, let's see, 8 schools in the district, and 5 of which are elementary, or have K-5 in it. Would you bring that up at a district level meeting if it's something not specific to all the schools?
The data we want to look at the district level should be data that we have from every single school, unless sometimes, for example, Ronnie, we may have an intervention that's part of a grant. You may have, the Read to Achieve grant or something of that nature where you don't have it in all schools. That's a district decision whether you want to look at some of that data or not. I encourage you to look at data first that is available to all schools. And then if you have room to add those additional pieces.
Okay. I know we've got some situations like that with, like we have a STAR font or STAR early literacy that we've been given in K-5. And then with our reading diagnostic with Senate Bill 9, that's going to be something new next year. And I didn't know if we should try to, which some of our K-5 schools are actually K-8. So, it would apply to them, but I've kind of wondered about that before. If it didn't apply to all the schools, should we still look at that data or not?
That's a great question. And I think that really brings us to another point, is if let's just pretend for a second that we're in one district and we're looking at iReady data, Brigance data, Dibbles data, and STAR early literacy. Oftentimes we are giving assessments. We are giving 2 assessments, or sometimes in districts, we're giving 3 assessments that are for the same purpose. So that also brings us to, the question is, what is this assessment for and why are we giving it? We know that kids are being assessed often, and we want to make sure that if we are giving an assessment, we are utilizing it for something to support student achievement. So in some districts, we have found that they are giving 2 or 3 universal screening assessments, and they're only looking at the data from one. So why are we paying for and why are we giving these 2 additional assessments? So that's the reason I was kind of saying, let's clarify what you're using each of these pieces for. Because when we think about MTSS, we should have a universal screening assessment and we should have a diagnostic assessment. So those are really the 2 pieces that we have to have. And then anything additional is just going to be on top of or an extra piece of data. So I want you to think about that when you're talking through this year at a glance data.
That's actually something that we've done in our district. We found that we were actually doing that, Megan. And one of the things that we're looking at doing is some de-implementation, because we started looking and we saw that we were having some resources that were doing the same thing, and which some of it was because we had a grant come in, and well, there's different scenarios, but we are looking at de-implementing some of our resources.
And I think that's really common. Maybe we've gotten, for example, we've gotten STAR because we have SAVE. That's very common. And so how are we utilizing STAR? Are all of our students taking that? And really streamlining that. So in a lot of districts that are utilizing Save the Children, they're able to say, well, we're going to give MAP first. And then if a student doesn't meet benchmark on MAP, that student is eligible to take STAR. So it really goes back to alignment of data, alignment of initiatives, and alignment of assessment. So that's a great, I'm glad to hear that you all are already kind of working on that piece. And oftentimes, as a teacher, I may not know or understand, somebody's told me to give this assessment to my students, so I do, but maybe I'm not really clear on the purpose of this assessment. What are we utilizing this data for? So we have to kind of think about those things as well.
Megan, Ronnie saying that kind of just jogged my memory. I was in a meeting one time, this has been years ago, and just kind of bringing this up. I was a district personnel, and we were in a Title I meeting. And so part of the conversation, and I just kind of want to throw this out here to have this to bring this to awareness, I guess. One district shared in that meeting that they had purchased a cheap universal screener. And why they did that was because, and that was, Title I is supplement, not supplant.
Mhm.
And so they bought a cheap universal screener that they gave to every student that they used general fund for. And then they went and then they purchased something like MAP or STAR, or iReady, which is a much more expensive screener that they were able to use Title I for, because they were saying that that was supplement. So I just kind of want to throw that out there, as I was, and I had not thought of that in all the conversations we've had, Megan. I had not remembered, that just popped in my head, and why some of them will sometimes have the two screeners also.
Sure, sure. And Mary and I also, Mary can share with you, we worked together this past year with a district, and we did a miniature assessment audit, so to speak, and we just kind of had them list, what are all the assessments that your kids are taking in every grade level? And we put it, on some chart paper, and we put it up around the room. And I think even our district leadership team was like, wow, we didn't realize our kids were taking all these assessments. And so then the next question was, how are we using these assessments? Why are we taking these? And unfortunately, oftentimes the question goes back to, or the answer goes back to, well, we really don't know. It's just what we've always done. And so I think with MTSS, one of the pieces with database decision-making is we have to know what data we need and what data we don't need. And just like Ronnie already mentioned, in his district, they're working on maybe de-implementation or deselection of some of these assessments. And so we need to be really clear as to what assessments we're giving, what time of year, are those assessment windows, and how are we using the data. You all know we've all been in that classroom at some point, and when we think about all the different pieces of data, our teachers need to be really clear on, I'm using this data to drive instruction. This is the data I'm going to use to help me differentiate. This is the data we're using to determine who needs what interventions, because when we have multiple data sets, oftentimes I like to say we are very data rich and implementation poor. We're spending more time looking at the data and giving assessments than we are actually implementing an intervention or even instruction core. So we have to think about those things as well. All right, any other thoughts on that? So really, when you think about August, you think about this first month of the year, you should either have access to or be giving some universal screening data and some diagnostic data, right? So those are really the two pieces that we know we should have in place based on our Kentucky regulations. So these two we should have. Now, who dropped something in your year at a glance for social, emotional, or behavior data for August? Did anybody drop anything in there?
I dropped in CI3T, that screener.
Okay, who is that shared that? I'm sorry, I can't.
Tina.
Okay, so she mentioned CIT3, and so what that is, it's a platform out of the University of Kansas where you're really looking at, it's called Student Risk Screening Survey. And that is a universal screener for behavior. So that might be something. Tina, is this data in your district available to share at the August meeting, or is that something that they give during August?
Last year, they actually gave it in October. That way they had a little bit of time to get to know the students.
So maybe we're looking at it in August, it's from the spring?
Yes.
Okay. So that might be your spring data. Anybody drop anything else into the August? So we like to encourage our districts to look at office discipline referrals from the previous year. So in August, it's a great idea for that district team to look at what behavior looked like across your district for the previous year. This year, we had several districts that looked at data and were very surprised to see the highest behavior incident was fighting. And if we know that in August, then we should be able to put preventative measures and practices in place to prevent fighting from being such a high area this coming year. So there are things that come out of that office discipline referral data in Tableau that are really helpful to look at a year, a year at a time, to determine what maybe your goals are for the coming year or the coming semester. So office discipline referral data. We also encourage, if you're at the school level, you need to look at that at the school level for the previous year. So district level and school level, that office discipline referral data. Are all of you all utilizing Tableau reports? I believe, Ronnie, you all are in Letcher County, I'm pretty sure. Morgan County, I know, is using Tableau. Tina, what about you guys in Carter? Are you all utilizing Tableau?
Yes, we use Tableau, and then our DPP has started working with the early warning detection tool.
Yes. So that early warning is another great data piece. Oftentimes, our high school specifically will look at that early warning about October, because that has given them about 9 weeks to go in, set up some of that data, and have some accurate numbers. So early warning oftentimes is around October or November when they're looking at that for the first time.
Mary
right.
Beth dropped in the chat that Pike County is too, using
Okay, great.
the Tableau.
I missed Pike County being on. I'm so sorry. Anybody else I've missed, Mary? Tableau. Everybody looking at Tableau at this point?
Nothing else in the chat.
Okay. So I want us to talk about September, October, November, December. What else did you guys drop in for those months? What other data sources did you all drop into your year at a glance chart for those months?
This is Tina. I put in Frisky referrals and counselor referrals, which our counselors are super protective about that. They feel like that's a fine-edged sword there that we're walking, but we've explained to them it's about the type, the number.
So here is something else that you can do with this chart. So for example, a lot of our districts look at school counselor referrals on a monthly basis. So it's something that you're going to share every single month. You can maybe go ahead and put it over here and italicize it. So school counselor referrals, we're not asking for session notes. We're not asking for what the referral was about. We just want to know how many referrals did we have from students? How many referrals did we have from parents? How many referrals did we have from teachers? Just a number there. So if it's something you're going to be looking at every single month, it can always go over here in this column as well. Thanks, Tina, for sharing that. That's a great point.
One thing in our district that would probably need to go over there as well, just because it's such an issue, and I think it's probably a statewide issue as well, is attendance. We look at that monthly.
Yes.
Which that's been a real issue. Like I said, for us, I don't know, maybe it isn't for everyone, but
I'm pretty sure it is. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Yes, attendance for sure. Anything else you can think of? Really, office discipline referrals really would also go over here. And it's probably going to be office discipline referrals for that current month, but we're going to leave them in August because this is going to be for the previous year. So that's the previous school year. So I'm going to stop sharing. I want you all just to kind of think about how this tool could help you. Do you think this would be beneficial for your district level team to kind of sit down, go through this document, go through this tool, and be able to look at what data we're utilizing when? Let's just talk about that for a few minutes. How do you all envision utilizing this tool?
I think it just makes it more intentional that you're going to look at that data, instead of, kind of, I guess, playing it by, or, off the cuff. You've got a plan in place. I mean, this is when we're going to look at this data, or we're going to be intentional about it.
Sure, definitely having a plan and being intentional about the data. I think the other thing that this does when we look at it as a district team is maybe I have some data at my school that I've been looking at that other administrators haven't been looking at. So, you know, just like I think it was Tina that said that early warning tool. So maybe my high school is looking at the early warning tool and we're using it to target students and who needs a check-in, check-out. And Mary is at another high school and they hadn't really thought about using it that way. So it's also creating some consistency when we talk about it at the district level. So being intentional, being strategic, reinforcing consistency. You also can see if you have gaps. So, you know, if you're super heavy on that academic data all the way across your year, and then all of a sudden you're thinking, maybe we need to be focused on some other data pieces that are non-academic. It also will help you think about which data you need for tier 1. So I think that's another good piece is we may be thinking about individual students a lot of times when we talk about MTSS, but we have to think about at this district and building level meeting, what is our tier 1 data we're looking at across the board? Anybody else, how might you utilize this in your school or your district to help support your work around database decision making? Did anybody think about, you know, we already talked about naming a person or tagging a person to be responsible for the data. So if it says that we're going to have Brigant's data at the August meeting and Mary's the one tagged with Brigant's, that's really monitoring and holding her accountable for that data, right? So check in with her a couple days before. Mary, do you have that Brigant's data? Let's sit down and look at it. You know, if I'm the lead or if I'm the administrator in that building, just making sure that we have the data we need once we get to the meeting. So this is really helpful for that as well, because you don't have to stop and think and wonder as the lead, whether it's at the district level or the building level, you say, let's go back to our chart. It says we're going to have this data and this is this person that should have it. So let me check with them. So it helps with monitoring as well. Anybody else have any other thoughts on how you might utilize this? Okay, Mary, it is 1:35, so we're a little more than halfway through our session. Let's take a 5-minute restroom break, get a drink, get up and move, whatever you need to do. And then we'll come back and talk more about data. So let's come back. 1:42. Mary, does that sound good to you? Does that work? 1:42.
Sounds great to me.
Okay. See you all in just a minute. Mary, can you see that screen okay?
Yep, I can see it.
All right, so we're going to jump back into database decision making. And we're going to think about all 3 tiers of data and student supports within all 3 tiers. So we have to consider student assessment data, which is what we've already talked about. We've talked about what assessments we are giving, the purpose of those assessments, when we're going to give them, and when we're going to look at the data. So we have to be very intentional about that student assessment data from tier 1 moving into tier 2 and tier 3, and then make decisions based on the data, because sometimes we look at the data and then we make decisions not based on the data, even though we have it in front of us. And so I think that's something, if you're in a school or a district where this MTSS journey is a little bit newer to you, we have to think about following through with database decision making. And we have something called the data analysis protocol that really helps you do that. It helps you look at it from a team perspective, and it helps you talk through some guiding questions. And we're going to look at that in just a second. So database decision making motto, a meeting without data present is not a meeting at all. How many of you all have ever been to a meeting And we have an agenda, and there might even be data on the agenda, but we don't ever get into the data. We don't talk about the data. We just talk about maybe how we want to change things or what we think would work or wouldn't work. How many of you all have been to those meetings or been a part of those meetings time and time again in some cases? Anybody been a part of that?
Yep, in the chat.
Okay, so I'm sure that in some way, all of us have been a part of those meetings, and we know oftentimes we leave that meeting thinking, well, gosh, we didn't get anything accomplished. That was a waste of time. So we want to make sure that our MTSS meetings at all 4 levels are not a waste of our time and energy for our teachers, because if they feel like they're a waste of time, then they're not going to make them a priority. So that's one of the pieces I think that is important with database decision making, is to have that data at the table is really important for everybody to see the value of the meeting. So here are some keys to database decision making. We have to think about all tiers of instruction and intervention, and all levels really require that database decision making process. It's not that we just do it at level 1 or tier 1 and then we don't think about it again at tier 2 or tier 3. I think oftentimes in districts, the opposite happens. We think about data when it comes to individual students and their progress monitoring, but we're not using that same process for grade levels or groups of students or whole schools. So we have to think about that at all levels. Another piece that we have seen over the past several years that really is a barrier for some districts and some schools is our data literacy skills. So when we think about who we have in our schools providing instruction, providing support across the board, we all know that we have lots and lots of new teachers. We have lots and lots of new administrators, whether it's at the building level or the district level. So we have lots of leadership turnover, lots of classroom teacher turnover, and data literacy skills are not something that you typically learn a lot about, even in a 4-year teacher educator program at our universities, let alone at some of our alternative certification programs. And so data literacy skills are something that we have seen for a couple years that I think are really creating barriers for districts and for schools as far as implementation. So you have to be really honest with yourself and reflect on what the data literacy skills are of your population. Is this something our teachers, our administrators need, or is this something that we feel like they are doing a really good job with? And sometimes some professional learning is needed. There are lots and lots of times where we do a quick 1-hour, 2-hour session for school level administrators on their universal screening reports. We may be all using, again, we have 12 schools in our district and we may all be using the same platform, but if we're looking at 6 different reports in 12 schools, then again, we're lacking consistency at the school level. So which reports are the most important to look at from the district level? Which reports are the most important to look at from the school level? Sometimes we don't get the reports we need and we have to take the data from those platforms and make our own report or our own graph, so to speak. So data literacy skills are really critical when we think about database decision-making process across the district. Ensuring that we have data in a graph format prior to all meetings. I've already talked about this a little bit, but that again is going to be something that's really important to move your district or your school forward. We can look at data in an Excel sheet, in a Google sheet, but until we see that graph and we're looking at graphs over time, that's going to still be a barrier. So making sure your data is in graph format and it's in a format that everyone understands. If Mary is on my team and Mary is responsible for graphing our universal screening data, but there's not a key to the data and we have to look at it for 15 minutes to figure out what the data is telling us, then maybe that's something we need to work on the back end. We need to make sure our graphs are in an easy to read format. There's a key that tells us what the pie chart or the bar graph is and what it means. We also have to think about valid and reliable assessments. And I know that several of you have already mentioned this, but we have to know what are the assessments we're giving, what is the purpose of each of these assessments, and are they valid and reliable? We have had a lot of districts utilizing some type of screener. They're calling them screeners, but maybe it's not an evidence-based screener. I'm sure that all of you all are aware that KDE, out of the Office of Teaching and Learning, they do have a list of approved universal screeners that have validity and reliability that are at the level that they would like at the state. And we also have a list of diagnostic assessments that are approved through the Office of Teaching and Learning. So those valid and reliable assessments are really important, especially when it comes to individual student level and we have progress monitoring. We are still seeing across the state a lot of progress monitoring data that is teacher created probes, that doesn't have any validity or reliability behind them. So we want to make sure that we have valid and reliable assessments, not only at tier 1, but also at tier 2 and tier 3. So ensuring that those pieces are in place is going to be important. The next key is decision rules. And so when we think about database decision rules, do we have those in place? A lot of districts will say, well, we know what they are, but are they clearly in place in writing? Because again, if I'm a new administrator and I come in, or I'm a new MTSS lead, or even a classroom teacher, do I know what those decision rules are? And do I know when I'm using those decision rules? Do I know that 3 data points below the aim line for a tier 2 student means that we change the tier 2 intervention? You know, are those things clear and in writing? That's going to be important to move your MTSS work forward. Are we triangulating data sources? Are we using one data point and not considering others, or are we triangulating that data to look at the whole child? Do we have assessment calendars in place for stakeholders? So again, I'm going back to new administrators and new teachers. If I'm a new teacher and I come in on a Monday and you say, okay, tomorrow we're going to start iReady testing. Do I know what iReady testing is? Do I know what my role is? Do I know why it's so important that we give it this week? You know, so just sometimes that's a quick PLC meeting or a quick staff meeting just to make sure that all staff and all stakeholders are on board with what those assessments are for. We oftentimes see in high schools, and we hear high school administrators or district level administrators say, we can't get our high school students to take these seriously. They don't see the value of a certain assessment. Well, I think that goes back to they're a stakeholder too. So do our students understand what these assessments are? Why are they taking them? Do our teachers reinforce that with students? So if teachers don't know why they're taking them and a student says, why are we taking this iReady test again? We just took it. And the teacher's response is, I don't know. They just told us we had to take them this week. As a student, I'm not going to have a whole lot of buy-in to that assessment if that's my teacher's response. So I want you to think about that. What is the stakeholder buy-in for our assessments across the district? And do we have all those on a calendar? And do we have that 4-step problem-solving process in place? So these database decision-making keys are really important when it comes to teaming at all levels. This is our 4-step problem-solving process that we've identified through KYMTSS. All 4-step problem-solving models follow these 4 steps. So if you're utilizing a PDSA, that's great. It goes through these exact 4 questions. And if you're using root cause analysis, those are our most common models, but all models should have the same 4 components of that 4-step problem-solving process. So the first step, as you can see, is identifying the problem. The second step is problem analysis, or really hypothesizing why is this problem occurring within our data. The third step is planning and implementing what are the evidence-based practices we're going to put in place. And then the 4th step is evaluation. Is the practice, or are the practices we put in place in step 3 working? Did that change our data? So when we talk about these 4 steps, step 1 is really critical and important. Step 1 is also the easiest step for us in education to skip. So when we think about problem identification, we oftentimes jump to the reason it's occurring. So let's say that our problem is attendance. We've already talked about attendance being an issue across the state right now. So let's say attendance is our problem. We immediately jump to you know, attendance is a problem because kids got used to not coming to school during COVID, and it didn't count against them if they had so many absences. So we've jumped into number 2 before we've really identified the problem in step 1. So if we go back to step 1 and we say, what's the problem? Attendance in and of itself is not enough in that step. We have to say, students in grades 9 and 10 have the lowest attendance percentages in such and such school, or in such and such time period. So when we think about problem identification, we have to be really specific about the problem. I think we see oftentimes that we look at problems as a whole instead of digging down and identifying and specifying what's the time period, what student group are we talking about? Because when we do that, it's much easier for us to analyze why it's occurring. And then it's also easier for us to target who we're going to implement an evidence-based practice with. So that step 1 is oftentimes the step that we like to skip, and it's probably one of the most critical. So when we think about all of these different teaming levels, this database decision-making process of these 4 steps should be occurring at the district level team. It should be occurring at the school level team. It should be occurring at the grade level team. And it also should be occurring at the student intervention team level. So I think that that's something oftentimes that our administrators kind of struggle with, is they are okay going through this problem solving process right here at the district level and the school level. But once it gets down to the levels 3 and 4, they don't think that's as applicable. So I'm here to say that those four-step problem solving process is critical at all 4 levels of teaming. So the next question becomes, let's think about data at each level. So what is the data set we're looking at each of these levels, and what might that look like for us? I think I may have skipped. Hang on 1 second. I want to go to a different slide first. Let's just talk about decision rules before we go back to this one. Can you all still see that screen okay, Mary?
Yeah, we can still see it.
So I want to talk about that 4-step problem solving process with each of the levels of teaming, as well as each of the tiers. So it's almost like we're doing an overlay of the teaming and the tiers of instruction. So when we think about that building level team and the district level team, it's looking at all 3 tiers of instruction. When we think about that grade level, that content area, PLC, we really are looking at each of the tiers as well, but we're focused more on groups of students who did not meet benchmarks. So we're really looking at groups of students in tier 2 or tier 3. So I want you to think about that just a little bit, and overlaying or overlapping those 2 pieces. And then once we get into that individual student level, we really are talking about students who are receiving tier 2 and tier 3 evidence-based practices. Now, we know that they should be receiving all of the tier 1 instruction as well, but the data we're looking at those individual student level meetings really is tier 2 and tier 3 data. So I think database decision rules are something important for us to talk about. What does that look like and sound like for us as we move students through those tiers? So I'm not sure if any of you all have ever heard this term before, but oftentimes we will say they are living. Oh, something just happened to Alma. They are living in tier 2, or it's a student who has lived in tier 3 for 2 or 3 years. So when we think about intervention, the goal is for our students not to live in these intervention tiers. We want them to move either up the triangle, or we want them to move down the triangle. So when we think about that, do we have decision rules in place? And again, they need to be in writing for moving students into a tier 2, intensifying tier 2 into tier 3. Once we have data to support that tier 3 was effective, let's fade tier 3 and move them back down into a tier 2 intervention. Once tier 2 is effective and we've closed that gap, let's move them back to where they're not receiving a tier 2 intervention, they're just receiving that core instruction. So those database decision rules are really important when we think about moving our MTSS process and what that's going to look like. So do we have a written set of rules to guide that decision process at all tiers in all domains? So I'm going to pause here just a second. I want you all to think about that. If you are a classroom teacher, do you know if there's a written set of guidelines? If you are an administrator, do you have a written or unwritten set of guidelines? Remember, these guidelines are not hard and fast, but it's a guide. That's what it is. Each one of the decisions is going to be left up to that team. But do we have something to guide us in our decision making? Do we have these in place? So I'm just going to stop just a second. I want you all to think about this. Do we have decision rules in place? And are those decision rules in writing? Just drop the answer to that in the chat if you want to. So first question is, do we have decision rules in place?
In the chat, it says, yes, Mary Beth Stiltner says yes. Tina says, yes, we have decision rules in place for each tier level.
And then we have to think about our decision rules in writing.
Ronnie says we currently don't at the district level. We are updating our MTSS plan to include those.
That's a great next step. Great next step, Ronnie.
Not in writing, says Mary Beth, and can do better using them.
Okay.
Meredith says, if so, I have never seen them.
So I think it's really important thinking about, again, new teachers, new administrators. It's great to have decision rules, but we really need them in writing. They should be a part of our MTSS plan. Like Ronnie said, they're updating theirs currently. A lot of districts also will have the decision rules right on the forms or paperwork you're completing for student interventions. So someplace easy where everybody knows where they are, what they are, to be able to move the work forward. When we get into the different tiers of instruction and intervention, I think that we really have to consider, is everybody as far as stakeholders on the same page with what benchmark is? So benchmark is not a district decision. Benchmark is based on whatever valid and reliable assessment you are giving. A lot of times I think districts think, well, if we go with, I'm just going to use MAP, for example, you know, their benchmark is the 50th percentile. So any student that is at the 49th percentile or below, by Kentucky regulations, really should be receiving some type of intervention. But we have some districts who go, gosh, if we do that, that's going to be so many kids, we're never going to be able to provide intervention for them. So they will set the benchmark at the 35th percentile or the 40th percentile. So we really cannot do that when we're talking about benchmark. That benchmark is whatever that valid and reliable assessment says it is. We can't change those benchmarks. Now, we may not have capacity to provide intervention for that many students, and we say that all the time. You're never going to be able to provide enough intervention for poor core instruction. So we have to work on tier one. But we have to know what benchmark is. Do our classroom teachers know what it is? Do our students know what it is? All stakeholders should really know and understand that benchmark. And then for tiers 2 and tiers 3, we have to think about how many weeks of intervention are we providing prior to ever making a decision. So again, there's nothing in a regulation, it's a district decision, but typically that is somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks of intervention before we're looking at that data as a whole to make a decision on next steps. Do we know how many data points above or below the aim line or the goal line indicate a change in intervention? Does it mean that we're intensifying the intervention, or does it mean we're fading the intervention? How many different interventions do we need to try in tier 2 prior to intensifying that? And then what is adequate progress with progress monitoring? I read a lot of district MTSS plans. And in a lot of plans, it will say if student is not making adequate progress, or it will say when student is making adequate progress. So we really have to define that. What is adequate progress? Because adequate progress to me as a 20-year EBD teacher and adequate progress to you as a second-year teacher are going to look very different. So we really need to put those things in writing. What is adequate progress in our district? What are we looking at when we say that? What are we talking about? So those are some of the pieces that are important in each of the tiers. This is an example of what that individual student progress monitoring graph might look like. Maybe the blue line is our goal line, the red line is our trend line. So each of those stars that you see on there is a progress monitoring data point. So if we're looking at this and our decision rules say 3 data points above or below the goal line indicate adequate progress or indicate not adequate progress. What would you all tell me about this graph that you're looking at right now? What would you all tell me? Again, the blue line is the goal line. The red line is the actual data trend. What would you guys tell me? Drop it in the chat. What would you say about this student and our decision rule?
Making adequate progress, Ronnie says.
Okay, anybody else? So Ronnie, talk to us about how you knew the student was making adequate progress.
Well, if the blue line is the goal line, then they're actually performing above what the goal was.
Absolutely. So if we look at 5 data points, 4 of the 5 are above the goal line, right? If that blue is the goal line. Now,
Right.
anybody have any other thoughts on this graph as you look at it? Here was my question with this graph is, okay, I can read that, but red seems to me as if we're not making progress. So could we switch the red and blue? That would be, just a question to make it easier. Again, data literate, we need to make sure that our teachers understand and can read these. So if I see the red, I know the red is below what the student should be performing, and the blue or the green is above. So just some things to think about when you're reading graphs. What's the easiest way to look at the data and to read the data? Because when we look and see those red numbers and those red X's, to me, I immediately go, oh, that means they're not doing something, right? So just some things to think about with your progress monitoring data. Any other thoughts on this graph? All right. Now, the other thing is the assessment calendar. We've talked a little bit about this, but do we have an assessment calendar that everyone knows how to access, what it is, where it is, that tells us what grade levels take what assessments and the time frame of the year that they're taking those assessments in? And it goes beyond just that universal screening assessment, right? This one has AP coursework on there. It has our ACT. It has the COGAT for gifted. So lots of different data pieces. When we think about a district perspective, any assessment we're giving in the district should be on this calendar. A lot of times, I think our assessment calendars that are provided by the district, principals utilize those, school counselors typically utilize those, or whoever your building assessment coordinator is. But as a classroom teacher, that may not be something that you typically see and are familiar with. So is that something that we might want to add as an action item, or a next step is making sure that our assessment calendars are available to all staff members? And then again, here's an assessment calendar looking at the time frame. So when are we giving these different assessments? So this next piece, by the way, I did update the folder. So you should have all documents within that folder at this time. So if you are thinking about a data audit within your district or within all schools within your district, this is a great place to start. Just having your MTSS teams at the building level drop in this matrix, What is the reading data? What is the math data? What are we looking at in each tier? If you have more than 2 or 3 schools and you do this at the school level and then have them submit this to someone at the district level, you're going to see some inconsistencies. So this is a place, a good place to start if you want to kind of streamline your data and what's being utilized across your district. And I know several of you have mentioned that today. But what one school is using as tier 2 data for reading, another school may be using it as tier 1 data. So how are they using that data? The other thing is oftentimes we will see schools and administrators will say, here's the data points, but we don't really know if we're using it for tier 1 or tier 2. We kind of think we're using it for everything. So again, it just goes back to consistency and streamlining that process across your district. We've already talked about our data sources. We're going to come back to this, and I want you all to look this time at that comprehensive school mental health data and the community data. So let's take just a second, let's take 60 seconds, and I want you all to scan that comprehensive school mental health data column, and I want you to scan the community data. I want you to think about, we're going to talk about this question, how might data sources from these 2 columns help us support students at the school or district level? So just scan those, spend about 60 seconds. How might some of this data help us at the school level? Okay, let's talk through some of these data points. How might some of this data help support students if you look at it at your district team or at a school level team? Any thoughts from any of you? And I'm assuming that our principals are going to have different thoughts than our teachers. So we would love to hear both perspectives. If you want to drop it in the chat, that's okay. If not, we can just have a quick conversation. I know that Tina already mentioned your school counselor data. Some other pieces that go along with that could be student hospitalizations. Again, we're not identifying specific students. We're just looking as a whole at those numbers. Teacher to school counselor referrals or counselor to clinical mental health clinician referrals. Those are 2 different data sets, but they could really help us make some decisions. What decisions might those help us with?
I definitely think the FRC surveys are critical, looking at the unemployment rate, social services, out-of-home placement. Those things can work together to give us a bigger picture of our student life.
Absolutely. What things are those data pieces going to tell you about your students as a whole group?
Oftentimes, it's going to tell me if a student has electric in their home, if they have running water. It's going to tell me. It's going to tell me if they're getting food regularly.
Absolutely. So if our kids are not eating and if they're not sleeping, if they don't have running water, those are basic needs, right? And so we know when our students do not have their basic needs met, it's really difficult for them to come to school and focus and learn academic content. So is this an underlying or root cause of some of our academic performance, right? We have to consider those things. When we look at things like our handle with care data, that is looking at how many of our students are dealing with maybe traumatic situations in the home or outside of school. We know how trauma impacts the brain and what it does to students as far as cognitive processing, how it blocks some of those neuro pathways for cognitive processing and how it puts kids in that fight or flight mode. So we know the impact that can have on student learning. Anything else? What other pieces of data do you think would be really important to look at? In a lot of our more rural districts in Kentucky, we look on a regular basis at our social services out of home placement, because that tells us a lot about the demographics of our student population. We know that being removed from the home is a trauma in and of itself, even when it's not a good home situation. So that helps us determine, what do those kids need? What is that, who is that student group, and what are some of the things that they may need? Looking at Narcan uses and that Casper database in Kentucky, that also really helps us and tells us where are we with drug use in our community. And we know that that's something that's affecting all school districts and schools across the state, but is our rate higher than that of the state average? Is it lower? Is that something that we may want to think about? Do we need to put some type of drug prevention program in tier 1? Is it something that we just need as an intervention in tier 2 or tier 3? So thinking about those things, we can put preventative pieces in place when we know what the data is telling us. But if we're not looking at any of these data sets, then we have a hard time justifying sometimes those practices or those programs. What else did you all notice about these two columns of data? Anything else?
I'm just thinking, if I was born addicted and that's been documented, then my hospitalizations more than likely would be higher than a student who was born without addiction.
Okay, that's a great point. Good point.
And also, other problems may occur as I become school age, first grade, second grade. Things come out that we are now finding out about our students with those issues.
Absolutely. Another community data point that's often monitored by school districts is that unemployment rate, because we know what financial strain and unemployment does to families in the home, and how that impacts kids on a daily basis as well, in so many different ways and so many different facets. Your YRBS data, that youth risk behavior survey data, your family resource or your Frisky coordinators typically have that data. That is awesome data to look at as a school level or district level team. It gives you information about which students are presenting which behaviors, how many of your kids have tried specific drugs within the past 30, 60, 90 days. It talks about which students, it asks students questions about how often they utilize substances. So that will give you a lot of insight, because it doesn't have student names on it. It's an anonymous survey, but that YRBS data is great data to kind of look at and determine what are some of the interventions that we may need to put in place. Your KIP data is also great. Your KIP data is where we get those numbers and percentages for how many students have a trusted adult in the school, how many students feel like they have a safe person they could go to at the school level. And again, that will help us with our trauma-informed practices, which are part of our School Safety and Resiliency Act. So lots of these data points are very useful to us, but we have to ensure that there's a balance. We don't want to just be looking at these data points and not academic and behavior. So one thing that a lot of districts do in order to balance that out is they take these comprehensive school mental health data points or community data points, and those are data sets that a subcommittee or a sub-team may look at on a quarterly basis. So if you're thinking about that district level MTSS team, it may be that your district level school mental health team is looking at these data sets, and they determine which data sets need to be shared at your district MTSS meeting. So that can look different depending upon where you are. So I want us to look at this teaming structure. Notice that this is a blank template, right? So we talked a little bit about those 4 levels of teaming. One of your next steps, I would encourage you, whether you are at the district or building level, to do this after today, is go ahead and put in, when we say membership in this column, you could put Mary Belcher, District MTSS lead, but I want you to put actual people's names and roles in these boxes. So I want you to be thinking about and looking at who is on which team, who is leading the team in all 4 levels of MTSS teaming. And then I want you to go to data. So I want you to be thinking about what are the data sets we're actually going to be looking at the district level, and drop those in this matrix. What are the data sets that we're actually going to be looking at all year at the school level? Drop them in this. You are going to find that you have either inconsistencies or gaps, and that will allow you to fix them. So we can't fix things if we don't know they're broken, right? But when we look at data, we want to make sure that all of our schools are utilizing the appropriate data at the appropriate level. So go ahead and drop some of those things in this document after today, this afternoon, sometime when your MTSS team meets, and this will be really helpful to you moving forward. Here's kind of an example of what that might look like. So when this says, you know, district data view, academic, universal screener for reading, writing, and math, I want you all to actually name the screener. So you can put universal screener, iReady, universal screener, map, whatever that is. I want you to actually put the name of the assessment on there. That will help clarify and help with consistency across the district. So this really, this document, these 2 templates that are in your folder, this is my challenge to you, I guess I would say, or your homework after this. I know we're not necessarily going to follow up after today's session, but these 2 documents right here are going to be really helpful to you as a district lead or a building lead moving forward with MTSS and database decision making. Okay. All right, I'm going to pause just a second and see if we have any questions. What questions do we have maybe about any of these documents or about the teaming structures and data? I'm going to pause just a second for questions. Any questions? Mary, any questions in the chat?
No, not seeing anything in the chat right now.
Okay, I want to spend the next few minutes kind of sharing some resources with you all. This data analysis protocol that we have talked about, the 4-step problem solving process, this is the protocol with the guiding questions. So this takes you through each of the 4 steps. And with each of the 4 steps, it will give you some guiding questions. What percentage of students are meeting or are not meeting benchmark? Based on that, how many students meet criteria for a tier 2 or tier 3 intervention? And then we have to think about, are we tracking that data? Do we know how many of our students are receiving a tier 2 intervention in reading, in math, in writing across the district? So those, sometimes we will find that we need some data sets that we don't currently have. So what's the easiest way for us to begin collecting that data or begin looking at that data? This data analysis protocol also brings in a lot of the equity lens questions. So I think that is great for us to be thinking about at the district and at the building level. Are we utilizing that equity dashboard? Are we ensuring that opportunities exist for all students, not just our gifted students or not just students that are not maybe qualifying for free and reduced lunch or whatever that looks like for us. So that data analysis protocol is in there. You also have in the slide deck that I'm going to put in that folder, you also have about 10 slides, and I'm going to go through these really quickly. This is the Tableau KDE data visualization. So this is what the reports that we encourage districts to look at. You all at the district level can determine what reports you want your schools looking at, but that student demographic analysis is really important as you start out. Then digging into that behavior analysis report, the student event analysis, events and resolutions, and then count of days removed. So here's what those reports look like to kind of help you. There is a link that's embedded in this that will take you to a short training video as well as directions if you are unsure of how to get to these reports or how to pull them. So this is that student demographic analysis report out of Tableau. It looks at number of students per grade level. It's just kind of a snapshot. So it looks at that, that disproportionality between our student groups. It will look at special education. It will look at migrant, EL, gifted students. So just kind of a snapshot is that student demographic. Then the next one that we always encourage districts to look at is this behavior analysis report. So you want to look at this from two different perspectives. You want to look at your Safe Schools report, and there is a drop-down menu that you can see that green arrow and circle. It has over there on the right side of this. This is behavior analysis Safe Schools report. These are your office discipline referral and your behavior incident that is going to be reportable for accountability. So notice over there in the left column, it says event type. We have 117,000 that are not reportable for Safe Schools. The Safe Schools are that you can see are that alcohol, assault or violence, bullying, harassment, drug, tobacco, and weapons. So for this district, this is going to be what's reportable for their Safe Schools. Now, if you click on that where you see the green arrow and the green circle, and it says all, then that's going to show you all students within that district, not just the Safe Schools. So that's going to be really important. You also want to look at this for your special education disability categories. That's that circle that you can see on the screen right now. And again, sometimes it takes these quite a while to pull up. So you just have to be patient with Tableau. If you are getting in Tableau early in the morning or super late at night, that is oftentimes when you're going to get the quickest reports. Here is another behavior analysis report for our free and reduced lunch. So that's something we want to consider when we're thinking about equity. And then here is our student event analysis report. This is looking at individual students and what events, as well as what resolution. You can get to those as well. So this is that student event analysis report we encourage districts to look at. This is the event plus resolution. So what was the actual event, and then what was the consequence, which is the resolution in Infinite Campus. Looking oftentimes at these, we see that students with the highest number of office discipline referrals also have the highest number of out of school suspensions. And so we want to think about, are we able to keep students in class? That's the goal. Are we looking at restorative practices for resolutions, that restorative discipline lens, or are we just looking at those punitive consequences and suspending students, which means they're not at school to get academic content? So that's that fourth report. We have the count of days removed report for our special education students. We know that anytime we're getting close to that 10 days, we really have to talk about a manifestation determination meeting and determine if the student's behavior is a result of the disability, and what's the appropriate placement. Is the student in the appropriate placement for that? Then looking at staff is also going to be helpful for you all when you think about some of these data points. Sometimes we have staff members who really need some professional development or some professional learning around classroom management. So is that something that this data is telling us? Those are our big reports that we like to look at. Here's a heat map. I'm not sure why that's so fuzzy. I don't know if it's fuzzy on your all's end, but this heat map will tell us what month of the year this occurred in, how many events, what that event was. So that's another report that we really like to look at. So I'm going to stop sharing. Those are just some resources that are going to be included in that folder. And I want us to all come back together for just a few minutes and think about questions that we may have around database decision making, or anything that we maybe have talked about or touched on that we want to talk about a little bit more. So I'm just going to kind of stop talking for a minute. Mary, if there's anything you want to reiterate, jump in and share. And if there's any questions, you guys, this is a great time to talk through some of those questions since we have such a small group on today.
I just want to say phenomenal job, Megan. You really did a wonderful job of pulling everything together and really helping to bring the data and how to share it through the district, the school, the teams. We do have an equity dashboard training. It's a repeat of what had been provided last month in May. On June the 19th in the afternoon, Bernadette's going to do a virtual meeting with it to kind of go through the equity dashboard. So if you were there at our IDPC principal meeting, you've already seen it, but she's going to do a repeat for those that may not could have attended that day. So looking at equity dashboard.
This
Vanessa,
data,
did you say something? No, maybe not.
database decision-making is a huge component of MTSS, and we haven't covered all of it today by any means, but I hope that we've started thinking about some things that will help us move your MTSS work forward, whether you're at the district leading that work or at the building. But lots of different moving pieces and parts when we think about database decision-making within MTSS. We have to think about our levels of teaming, and then we have to think about our tiers of intervention and instruction. So lots of different pieces there. I'll give you guys just a second to think about questions. You can drop questions in the chat or just unmute if there's questions you want to kind of talk through.
Megan, one challenge, I guess it would be that I've kind of seen this year, this year's the first year we've really started having teams, or I'm sorry, a district level team and going through our data. But sometimes, I'm sorry, I got muted there. But sometimes we have a question or data that is it varies so much from school to school. Whenever we're looking at it from the district lens, like discipline, that it may be that two schools can really skew the data heavily. And I don't know, that's something that I've kind of found is a little bit of a challenge, because sometimes it almost seems like it would be in some cases easier to look at school by school. I don't know if that's even, it's not even really a question. I don't know that, but that's a challenge I've kind of found is sometimes it doesn't seem like it's consistent from, school to school, some of our data. I don't know if that makes sense. Any suggestions whenever you're looking at situations like that?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, Ronnie, that's really common, when you have multiple schools in a district. I can say when I was entering Infinite Campus data, I entered it the way that I thought it was supposed to be entered. Nobody ever trained me how to enter it. Some schools, the principal enters it. Some schools, the counselor enters it. Some schools, it's a administrative assistant or your Infinite Campus clerk. So I think that's really common. One of the things that we encourage is if you're a district that's implementing PBIS, that part of your district PBIS plan is that you have clearly defined what those behaviors are with examples. And then you have some consistency with how behavior is entered. And then anybody who's entering behavior needs to go through a training with the district. In our district, this is how we want you to enter it. As you all, I'm sure know, Infinite Campus, there's a standard set of behaviors and resolutions that come out of the Department of Education, but as a district, you can also enter your own resolutions or your own behaviors. So it is without fail that if we pull a district report for all last year, if you are not a district who's done that, I bet you have 6 to 8 different ways or different codes for things like detention, in-school suspension. Some might have like ACP, alternative classroom placement. So you really have to define, this is what detention is. This is what in-school suspension is. This is what placement is. Because if you don't, when you look at that district-wide, you may have 6 categories where it's really one thing, but it's coded as the 6 different categories, if that makes sense. So again, it's just going back, and that will help you with consistency, because when we have that consistency at the district level, then as a district, we can say, okay, disrespect is a problem district-wide. So how are we going to address that? Or our in-school suspension numbers are way too high. We need kids in classrooms. So do we need to implement more restorative discipline policies as opposed to punitive discipline? So that really will help you if you think about it. You know, it's a lot of work up front, getting those definitions and examples and providing that training, but it will help you in the long run. So that's pretty common though.
Yeah, that's something that I was really shocked when we looked at our data. I really thought that a lot of our discipline issues would be when in places where it wasn't monitored, hallways, buses, and stuff like that. But it was overwhelmingly in the classroom. But I guess it's totally dependent upon how they entered the data. I mean, it could have been a classroom teacher and just they put classroom, you know, as a default answer almost, and which can skew the data.
Yes, absolutely. The other thing that we see all the time, Ronnie, especially if you're looking at district wide, is, you know, if I'm putting, maybe I'm the Infinite Campus clerk and I enter my principal's office discipline referrals on Friday afternoons at 2 o'clock. That's my time to go enter all those. Well, it's going to look like the behavior. If I don't go back and change each one of those, the default is whatever time I'm entering it. So we've seen districts or schools where it looks like they've got an astronomical number of behavior events Friday at noon. Well, it's not really all occurring Friday at noon. It's just because whoever was entering it just left the default there. So that happens a lot as well. So I don't know, Ronnie, if I answered your question or not, but I would encourage you to think about training your administrators or whoever's entering that data into Infinite Campus, and then looking at those different categories and what you have in your reports.
All right. Thank you.
Not seeing anything else in the chat yet, Megan.
So I feel like I've done a lot of talking today. I know some of this is at times overwhelming and a lot to wrap your head around. I will drop the slide deck in that folder as well. But again, I really want to encourage you to go back to that last document that we looked at and think about those different levels of teaming and what data you're going to put in each of those boxes within that matrix. And I want to encourage you to look at the year at a glance, the data plan year at a glance. Those two documents are going to help you as a district team or as a school team more than anything else with data. So that's where I would start. I'm going to encourage you all. I know you don't have to turn anything into us or anything, but if you all will work on those documents and share those with your team, I think you will be really pleased with how that helps you.
If you're okay with it, Megan, I can go ahead and drop the feedback survey link in the chat if you want me to.
Sure.
Okay. And so if you all, as you're filling that out, when you click enter, it should send an email with the certificate, and the ELA number should already be included when you're going through and filling it out, but I did put it in the chat as well. But it should email you a certificate to the email you provide. Check your junk if you don't receive it, but if you do not receive it, please be sure to email me and I will get that for you. But it should be 3 hours of ELA credit today for those of you that are district staff that you will need for ELA. If you are a teacher in the classroom, a lot of your district PD coordinators will accept this as PD credit. So keeping that for your records.